Ready. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see everybody. We're going to mute everybody, and we'll give you a chance at the end of the class to ask your questions, so jot them down. Thank you, everyone, for joining to tonight's class. Tonight, we will be studying Parashat Chayah, which we'll give a quick synopsis about, but we're going to focus on one amazing aspect that we're going to both see also in the Zera Shimshon and also in Rabbi Haman. I'd like to thank tonight's sponsors. Always a pleasure and a great honor that you're here supporting our Torah Center and spreading Torah worldwide, B'ezrat Hashem. So first is my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Max and Siggy Laredo, in honor of my mother's English birthday, which is today. Big Mazal Tov. Next is Mr. and Mrs. Yehuda and Aviva Ben Chorin in honor of Aviva's birthday, which is tomorrow. Mazal Tov, Mazal Tov, Mazal Tov. I think your Hebrew birthday is tomorrow, then the next day is your English birthday. So B'ezrat Hashem, a big Mazal Tov. A lot of long, happy, healthy life. Amen. Next we have Mr. and Mrs. Ron and Eileen Friedman in honor of their son's wedding this coming Sunday. A big Mazal Tov to David and Chelsea on the upcoming wedding, the entire Friedman and Green families and extended families. Big Mazal Tov.
And Jacob's birthday is Sunday also. Same day.
And a Mazal Tov to their son-in-law, Jacob, for a big Mazal Tov on his birthday to 120. Very nice. Thank you, Ron. Next is Diana Mitriani, who is sponsoring for B'ezrat Hashem in the honor of a shidduch for her two daughters who are now living in the Holy Land of Israel. And their names are Jael Feldman and Nurit Feldman. And also health and parnasa for all four of her children. That is for Jael and Nurit, and also her boys, David and Daniel Feldman. Second to last, we have Susan Steinfeld, who is sponsoring tonight's class in honor of her children and her grandchildren. Thank you very much. Last but not least, Nurit Kredlik, who is sponsoring tonight's class in memory of her father, Melech Genaur, I hope I pronounced that properly, whose Shloshim, the 30 days of his passing, is going to be Thursday night, Friday. So may his neshama have an aliyah. May his neshama rest up on high in merit of the Zera Shimshon, which he always loved learning. So thank you, everyone, and greatly appreciate it. Okay, we are now going to just give a very quick synopsis on or introduction to this week's Torah portion. And that is, at the end of last week's Torah portion, we read about the Akedat Yitzchak, and that was when Abraham is facing his 10th and final test from God, and that is to sacrifice his son. Unlike the other tests, this test was the first and only test that God tells him not to actually complete. The very fact that Abraham was willing to complete this test was a good enough sign as if Abraham passed this test and then his son Isaac was not slaughtered. Right after that, Abraham comes home with his son, and he is found with a new situation at hand, and that is the unfortunate passing of his wife, Sarah. Sarah being the first matriarch, first of four. And we're not going to get now into why she passed away, how she passed away. That's a whole other topic that's not for tonight's discussion. However, he's now faced with this fact that he has to bury his wife. And the Torah goes through back and forth with him acquiring land, setting out to acquire land, and acquiring the land to bury his wife. And that is all taken care of at the beginning of the week's Torah portion. 3 years later is when Abraham comes to his faithful servant Eliezer, and he commands Eliezer to go and find a wife for his son. And he gives him specifics and guidelines in order to go find that wife. And that's what we are going to pay attention to this evening. I want to share a verse with you. This is, all right. Does everyone see? Yeah, does everyone see it? All right, this is in Genesis chapter 24, verse 2. Vayomer Avraham elavdo. So this is Abraham commanding his servant Eliezer to go and find a wife for his son. Vayomer Avraham elavdo. So Abraham tells his servant, Zekan beto, the elder of his house, Hamoshel bechol asher lo, the one who ruled over all that he has, Simna yadecha tachat yirechi. Place your hand under my thigh, and that was a form of a vow. What does he tell him to do? He tells him to v'ashpiacha b'Hashem Elokei hashamayim v'Elokei ha'aretz asher lo tikach isha livni mibnot haKenani asher anochi yoshev bekibo. And then he goes, and we're not going to go through all the verses now. We'll go through them in a moment. But then he goes and he makes his servant Eliezer swear, take an oath that he will not take a wife for his son from the daughters of the Canaanites. Rather, he will go back to his homeland, as it says in verse 4, and get a wife for Yitzchak there. Now, there's going to be a couple questions we're going to have over here. The first is, before we even get into the Zera Shimshon, is why is it that Abraham did not go himself to find a wife for his son? Why is it that he sent a messenger? This is a fundamental question, because everything else we're going to speak about is really based on this. Why didn't Abraham do it himself? So there's a couple of reasons that our sages have brought out. Of course, there's always the concept of whenever a person does something, it's always better if you do it yourself. Like if you want to get something done, you do it yourself. This is not a modern concept. This is a concept for forever. You want to get something done, you do it yourself. The Talmud says that the mitzvah is bo yoter b'shlucho. A person is supposed to do a mitzvah himself greater than doing it with someone, having someone else do it on their behalf. Although certain mitzvot, certain commandments and obligations can be done for you by someone else, but it's always better to do it yourself. So why is it, as Abraham definitely had an obligation and a mitzvah to marry his son off, right? His son was finally 37 years old. It's about time, right? Why is it that he did not go and seek a wife for his son himself? By the way, we do learn from this that it is the obligation of the parents to find the proper spouse for their children. This may fit in line with modern marriages and relationships, may not, but I guess everyone really does understand the fact of the approval that a parent gives and how important that is to children when they do bring their prospective spouse back home. And this comes, and we see this all the way from Avraham, from Abraham. Now, why is it that Abraham didn't do it himself? So it's a couple different ways that our sages answer this. Number one is Abraham was very, very busy. Not to say that what he was busy with was more important than what he had at hand, what it had as an obligation for him to do, but he was extremely busy. What was he busy with? He was busy with non-stop teaching people, thousands upon thousands of people, about the word of God and bringing them closer to God, closer to the belief in God and in Torah. So he was extremely, extremely busy. So you may say, as busy as all that is, what good is it if a person is for the world and not for his own son? So the answer to that is that Abraham was so busy and nobody could basically do what he was doing. It wasn't like Abraham had a replacement that was able to continue doing what he was doing. He couldn't just disappear for a month to travel back and forth and go find a wife for his son. It was not practical. No one was able to make up for it, especially now in the unfortunate event that his wife was not around, who had to do everything. He basically now had everything to do. He didn't have his partner that was able to help. And therefore, there is a halacha, a law in the Jewish code of law, as well as in the Talmud, that if a person is right now busy doing something and something else comes up, another opportunity of something important that comes up, you're supposed to stop what you're doing and then go do that other thing if it's more important. So what's more important, teaching the world or getting your son married? As ridiculous as it sounds, having your son married is more important than you saving the world, because that's your direct obligation. But if you're able to complete both, then you're not allowed to stop what you're doing. So Abraham, although he was needed to go and take care of marrying off his son, but because he was able to have someone that was trustworthy, now we're going to really speak about who this trustworthy slave was. But since he had another option of a trustworthy method of getting sure that his son would find the proper wife, therefore he was obligated to continue what he was doing and send his faithful servant to go find a wife. That's number one. The second is that's one way that our sages answer the reason why Abraham himself did not go out and seek a wife for his son. Another explanation is the following. And we find this also by other patriarchs, meaning Yitzchak and Yaakov as well. Abraham now had the first minor shock of his life. His wife passed away. It's a very horrible, very sad thing. And normally what happens when the immediate people around an individual pass away, especially when they're close in age, right? They were only 10 years apart. A person starts thinking like, wow, maybe my time is coming soon. And I say Isaac and Jacob also had this because when they got to the ages of when their ancestor passed away, or close to when their ancestor passed away, they also started getting worried. So Abraham's wife just passes away. He now says, wow, I'm getting older. Maybe my time on this earth is not so much longer, right? A person doesn't know. And therefore, he at that point, he makes a decision that maybe I'm too old to travel. Maybe it's not the right thing for me to start picking up and going around. So therefore, in order to preserve himself and not to put himself in a life-threatening situation, he went and he sent his slave to go and find a wife for his son. So those are two explanations why. Now, having said that, the Zera Shimshon wants to know, all right, so we understand that Eliezer is Avraham's slave. Very good. That's Avdo. But then there is two other ways that the Torah refers to as Eliezer. So he says Avdo, his slave. He's the Zikan Beto. He's the elder of the house. And then he's also the Moshel Bechol Asher Lo. He's also the one who is now ruling and controlling everything that belongs to Abraham. So Zera Shimshon wants to know, why was Eliezer referred to as a Zikan Beto, as the elder of his household? So Zera Shimshon answers as follows. He says that, how could Abraham send a slave to go complete the task at hand? Right? We just gave two reasons why he couldn't go himself, either because he was busy or because he was getting too old. But how is it that he was able to send a slave? The Talmud says that a slave is never to be trusted fully. It's just a fact. And especially when it comes to areas of promiscuity and inappropriate relationships, slaves are just not able to be trusted. So how could Abraham send his slave, Eliezer, to go and find a woman, a wife for his son? How could he be trusted that he, God forbid, would not do something immoral or improper? So in order to answer that, the Torah says he was the Zikan Beto, he was an elder. He was an elder, and he was so committed to Abraham, and he was committed to God and committed to that way of life that he would never falter. He wouldn't make that mistake. He couldn't sin in that way. He was, as the Talmud says, he was referred to as Damesek Eliezer, which as the Torah refers to him is, and the Talmud says, Rashi quotes it as well, he was doleu umashke mitorat rabo le'acherim. What he would do is he would draw water from the well of knowledge that Abraham had, and he would go and give to drink to many others. Basically, what the Talmud is telling us is that Eliezer was not only an elder, but he was a teacher. He was one who spread the word of God along with Abraham. He was Abraham's partner. And this is how the Zera Shimshon answers how Eliezer was trusted to go and find a wife for Abraham's son Yitzchak, because he was a zekan beto. He was a believer, he was an elder, and he was a righteous individual. Now that takes us to the next phrase. How is it possible that he's referred to Hamoshel Bekol Asher Lo? He ruled over everything that Abraham had. Zera Shimshon wants to understand, how is it possible that Abraham was able to even teach Eliezer Torah? There is a prohibition, as brought down in the Talmud and the Rambam as well, that one is not allowed to teach a Gentile Torah. Did you know this? It's a very interesting law. You're not allowed to teach a Gentile Torah. Now, answers the Zera Shimshon in two different ways. Number one, Abraham didn't really teach Eliezer directly. Rather, he taught and Eliezer was just listening. So he wasn't teaching him directly. He just heard from afar, let's say. And the rest was that he learned himself. He furthered his education in understanding Torah and understanding about God himself. And he was taught by Abraham all the laws of a slave, which is allowed to be taught to a Gentile, or any laws that refer to a Gentile. But there's another answer that the Zera Shimshon gives, and that is that, sorry, I mixed the two up together. First answer was that he was teaching Eliezer indirectly, as well as all the laws which pertain to him for ruling his household, for being, let's say, like the butler and taking care of it. And the second answer, as Zera Shimshon says, what he taught Eliezer all of the laws that are that were pertaining to an eved, to a slave, and how to live in a Jewish home. Having said that, the Zera Shimshon goes on to explain, we see from this that Eliezer went and he taught the other slaves how to act, how to comport themselves, to compose themselves in Abraham's house. So when the Torah says that he was Hamoshel Bekol Asher Lo, that he ruled everything that Abraham had, what he did was he was literally taking care of all the other slaves that Abraham had as well. So having said this, I want to, again, share with you the way the verse looks. Look at the way the Zera Shimshon learns it. I want to add even one more thing. So, Vayomer Avraham el Avdo his slave. The Me'am Loaz tells us that this slave, Eliezer, was given to Avraham by Nimrod. When Abraham was victorious over Nimrod by the fiery furnace, as a token of you can't really say gratitude, but a token of being a winner, of Abraham being victorious over Nimrod, Nimrod gives Abraham Eliezer. So that's where he got him from. Zikan Beto, he was the elder of his house, and therefore he was, the Torah is proving, as Shimshon says, he was able to go and seek out a wife for Yitzchak. And then Hamoshel Bekol Asher Lo, his position in the house was no simple one. His position was one that was ruling over the rest of the slaves. He was learning diligently from his master and passing it on to the rest of the slaves and people in Abraham's household. So that is the Zera Shimshon. And again, I guess the lesson I wanted to share from this segment, is that we obviously don't have a concept of slaves nowadays, but we do have the idea of a person being faithful to a friend or to an employer or an employee. And it's a very, very powerful concept. It's an important concept. The Torah refers to Eliezer as the most faithful servant that anyone has ever had. And having said that, Eliezer himself had a tremendous merit and reward for being. Can you imagine that you are the right hand of Abraham back in the day, and always spoken about, and going and winning wars with him? It was a very, very amazing concept, and we do see how much trust Abraham put into Eliezer for going and seeking out the next matriarch for the Jewish people. So I think it's a fascinating concept.